Welcome back to the program. Well, there's been an interesting study from the University of Melbourne published across newspapers today claiming more than a third of Australian boys have misogynistic attitudes and 40% of Australian boys support violent extremist ideologies. The study into the link between misogyny and violent extremism was done in the wake of the Bondi Islamist attack, we're told, which I kind of found interesting. Two alleged Islamists shoot up a bunch of Jews, and a uni researcher thinks misogyny must have played a role. Joining me is National Education Editor for News Corp, Susie O'Brien. Susie, this was a study of 500, 600 boys aged 13 to 17 that sought to find a link between what it called anti-feminist attitudes and support for violent extremism. The Herald Sun reported the coincidence of misogynistic and extremist attitudes makes it an important and overlooked part of the puzzle in our countering violent extremism efforts and a possible early warning sign as a pathway to radicalisation. Now, I'm not disputing that misogyny is a problem, but I do find this study pretty unfair to boys when you consider the questions put to 13-year-olds. And I find it pretty convenient at a time when the focus should be on radical Islam rather than anti-feminist attitudes among Year 8 schoolboys. What did you make of the study?
Yeah, this was an exclusive story by my colleague Mary Papadakis today. Look, I think it's just alarming and depressing, really. And it wasn't done in the wake of the Bondi attack. It was released in the wake of the attack, but the research was done some years ago. What they're looking at is the nexus between anti-feminist views, anti-Semitic views, violent extremism, and sort of pro-white power views. And even in boys as young as Year 8, we find 40% saying that they, for example, they're anti-views, like views against women. So things like that they think you can use violence to get what you want. They think that women use sexuality to manipulate men. And they think that that in marriage a husband should be able to force a wife to have sex even if she doesn't want to. And so it's part of the puzzle in terms of extreme violent views. And I think as uncomfortable as it is, we need to know what some of these views are.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting study. I looked at some of the questions that were put to these boys, and as I said, many of them Year 8, Year 9 boys, I felt like I'm not so sure you would understand that boys would be able to understand some of the nuance of those questions. Anyway, interesting study. I want to ask you about an article you wrote, and no doubt my two 20-year-old boys will be home watching. So please help me out here, Susie. Your article was pointing out it's not unusual for kids to be living at home with mum and dad until they're well into their 20s, even their 30s. You wrote, with nearly half of young adults still living at home, overindulgent parenting has helped create a generation of kidults. You say we're raising a generation of young people who have learned helplessness, and their helplessness is being sustained rather than challenged. Am I failing my kids by still allowing them to be at home at age 20?
Oh, look, I've got a 20-year-old still living at home. I've got a 22-year-old still living at home. And look, it's fascinating because this has been a massive generational shift in like the last 10 years where even people our age, in their 50s and 60s are deferring retirement, and they are making retirement plans based on the assumption that they will have ongoing financial responsibility for their adult children. And pretty sure our parents weren't doing that 30 years ago. Like there was none of that kind of assumption. But you know what? I do love these stories about the kidults and, reflecting on my own perhaps too permissive parenting. I probably let them get away with too much because, we want them to be safe. We want them to save a bit of money. So we say, stay home a bit longer. But, they're very obliging, which makes it easier. They're happy to sit at home and wait for us to come home and cook them dinner. They're more than happy to borrow our car because they've got no petrol in theirs, and they will even lift up their feet so we can vacuum underneath. So, they're making it easy for us.
Susie, I've got to go, so just help me out here. My kids are watching. Should kids pay board, yes or no?
No, they're full-time students, but the minute they have full-time jobs, they will be paying board, that's for sure.
Thanks for nothing. Thanks for nothing, Susie. Appreciate your time tonight. Good on you.